Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Straight Shift. Today we need to talk about a little more of a serious topic. I want to talk about how the coronavirus outbreak is going to affect the U.S. automotive industry and how it's going to affect you as a car owner and potential car buyer. I really debated whether or not I wanted to cover this topic because I don't want to contribute to the mass panic and fear that is so rapidly spreading through our country and is causing there to be exactly 0 squares of toilet paper anywhere in this country. There's no toilet paper, people. You know people are panicking when there's no toilet paper. But I've had enough people ask me how this is, affecting my business and how this is going to affect the automotive industry in general that I am obligated to give you guys this information. But I also wanted to make sure that I'm reporting on it from a very journalistic standpoint. So I've spent a lot of time this week doing some pretty deep research and only using sources inside the automotive industry. I'm not relying on what other media outlets are reporting and all of that, the hype and just kind of the fear mongering that's going on. I mean, our media does an important job, but sometimes they do spread fear in order to sell, newspapers and ads and whatnot. So I have gotten this information directly from sources inside the automotive industry. I've been making phone calls, I've been sending emails, I've been sending text messages, and I have gone into our internal industry automotive news to see the data and the reports that are truly coming out of the parts of the world where the virus has been hitting the hardest so far. But I promise you guys, this is not going to be a depressing podcast. There's some good news in here, and I want to kind of keep this on at least a semi-positive note. We are dealing with a crisis, and that crisis is probably going to get worse before it gets better. But having actual facts, and there will be some speculation in here too, and I'll let you know when I go into speculation territory versus when we're in actual fact territory. So I want to talk about 3 main areas where the virus outbreak is affecting us, and that is parts availability, car availability, and car sales. So let's just jump into it. Oh, and I'm also going to talk about what the U.S. automakers are doing on their end to help contain the spread of the virus and to protect their employees, because that's actually really super positive stuff. China, of course, is the epicenter of this outbreak, and it has seen its automotive industry effectively shut down since the end of January. And this is a really big deal. China has been the world's largest producer of cars and car parts since 2008. Everybody makes cars in China now. Even the Japanese companies like Toyota and Honda and Nissan have plants in China. GM has a ton of plants in China. And all of the manufacturers, even the European ones, get critical parts from China for their plants, including the plants they have here in the U.S. So this is seriously disrupting the production and shipment of all of these Chinese-made auto parts and the components that we need to put those cars together here in the U.S. factories. It's a business about $17 billion last year of the import of Chinese car parts to the U.S. automotive industry. And, even more, factoring in the parts that are shipped to Mexico, shipped to Canada, even outside the U.S., every car manufacturing plant in the world is feeling the crunch of the production basically coming to a screeching halt in China. The outbreak in Japan is also hurting us. We import over $50 billion worth of Japanese-made cars and car parts every year. And automakers like GM and Fiat-Chrysler, Honda, Hyundai, even Tesla, they are already struggling to maintain their supplies. And in many cases, they have resorted to air freight instead of the slower shipping containers, that go over on the oceans to keep those supply lines from China and Japan open. They're worried about everything from engine parts to electronics to airbags, even brake pads. Simple things like nuts and bolts that we need to actually put all these parts together into a car are coming out of China. And if we can't get nuts and bolts, obviously we're not going to be able to build cars. General Motors had that big strike that lasted about 6 weeks last fall. And even in just that short 6-week period, they really felt the impact to their own plants and their dealer showrooms, but also at the independent service shops that relied on the GM produced parts. Those parts quickly fell into short supply, and that was just from a 6-week labor strike. So we know what the effects of a supply shortage can be. Now, the good news is that the automakers have learned from a lot of those supply shortages in the past. As soon as this virus started hitting China, they knew that they were going to face serious supply problems. So they took immediate action to start mitigating those risks and protecting that critical supply chain. A lot of the manufacturers have literally been stockpiling parts for the U.S. plants and their plants around the world. Kind of like people have been stockpiling toilet paper here. Now, Subaru makes the popular Ascent and Outback SUVs along with the Legacy sedan in a plant in Indiana, and they're in really good shape there, at least right now. They get parts from Japan and China, but they knew ahead of time and they stockpiled those parts. So far, they're not seeing a need to slow down the production of the Ascent and the Outback. Unfortunately, their super duper popular Forester and Crosstreks, like, for example, the Crosstrek that I'm buying for a client right now, that we've been having trouble finding it. The inventory of those cars, because they are produced at the plant in Japan, and that's come to a screeching halt as well. We're starting to see those inventory levels on dealer lots here in the U.S. start to dwindle. And I've got a really close relationship with Subaru, and one of the Subaru general managers here in Charlotte is a very good friend of mine. And she said that they're seeing their allocations, which means every month each dealer is given a certain number of allocations, basically a number of cars, a quota that they are allowed to request from the manufacturer for their inventory. And the more cars they sell, the more allocations they get to sell more cars next month. Well, those allocations for certain vehicles are being cut in half because all of the inventory of those cars that exists is either already on dealer lots or it had already come off the production line before the virus outbreak hit and the plants had to shut down. And those cars are already floating across the pond, in containers. They're already in transit, but there aren't any new vehicles coming off the production line right now to continue that supply line. So there's a possibility that certain makes and model vehicles like the Subaru Forester, which is one of the best-selling SUVs on the whole market, we could see those literally disappear. We could go down to zero and there would be none of them available until they can get those plants reopened to get production back up to speed. So even, Toyota, they learned a big lesson back in 2011, as did a lot of the other manufacturers back when the tsunami hit Japan. And they realized that, keeping all of your eggs in one basket in one place in the world probably isn't the best risk mitigation strategy. So they started looking at their global production and global supply lines and kind of spreading things out so that if one place has some sort of crisis and they lose the supply line from that area, they can rely on supplies from other areas in the world. That being said, they can't do that completely. And even the Toyota dealers have gotten an email warning them, hey, even as soon as next week, you may start seeing some rationing of your allocations of vehicles like the 4Runner and the little CHR, because those are still produced over in Japan and production is being hampered. So even the Korean and German manufacturers, they're in the same boat too. They import as many parts from China and Japan, and they're concerned about their supply lines. Even the automakers in India that make those weird little cars that we don't even get here in the US, they're feeling it. So literally, there is no area of the global automotive industry that is going to go untouched and unscathed by this virus outbreak. Now, despite efforts to protect their supply chain, so the industry experts, they do expect U.S. vehicle production will still be negatively impacted. Despite all the stockpiling of parts, we are probably still going to see some slowdowns of production of, Hondas, Hyundais, Fords, Chryslers, GM cars. It's really going to depend on how quickly the Chinese and Japanese markets can get their production facilities back up and running. And believe me, the automakers have been pushing so hard to get those plants open, but there's still, all the plants that are coming out of China, at least as of kind of the last week in February, which is the last date that I could get truly reliable inside information on, they were operating at about 20 to 30% of their workers. That's not 20 to 30% of their capacity. That's about 20 to 30% of their workers were able to go back on the job. But at best, they're operating still at a fraction of their production capacity and where they need to be. Vehicle production in places like Italy, that's shut down. Interestingly, Ferrari is still producing cars. So, hey, don't worry. All the rich people will still be able to get their supercars. It's the rest of us that might be in trouble. So those supply chains are what is going to put a cramp on production of automobiles overseas and here in the US. So if we start to see some shortages of certain makes and models of vehicles on dealer lots, that's why we can blame the coronavirus. Another area that we're going to see this parts crunch come into play is in the aftermarket industry. So many of the aftermarket car parts are made in China. About 60 to 75% of all the Chinese auto parts that come into the U.S. actually end up on that aftermarket market, I guess you would say. China's also a big producer of all the replacement body parts on cars. That's about 10% of China's global auto parts export, or actual body parts for cars. Chinese tires. Think about how many tires nowadays are made in China that we could see suddenly it may be difficult for us to get tires. So if your car needs servicing, you need to do some repairs, you need to get new tires, heaven forbid you get into an accident and your car needs a new quarter panel or a new hood, we could start seeing some shortages of those parts in the U.S. market. So if your car needs some work, you might want to consider having that done sooner rather than later while the parts are still available. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about car sales and how that's shaking out and what the automakers are doing to help prevent the spread of the virus and protect their employees. I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Ah, the Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Straight Shift. Today we are talking about the impact of the coronavirus outbreak on the U.S. automotive industry and how it's affecting the automotive industry globally. For the break, I talked about the supply chain problem of being able to get parts for cars and even certain specific makes and models that are produced overseas. One thing I did forget to mention is I did call multiple car parts stores like Advance and O'Reilly's and Pep Boys and even Worldpac, which is a supplier that is typically directly from the parts suppliers to the independent shops. Most of your average consumer does not buy directly from Worldpac, but they're a huge supplier of car parts around the world. And I asked them, are you seeing shortages of any parts in your store? And so far, none of them are seeing that at the local store level. I even talked to the parts managers at several dealerships for several different brands like Subaru and Toyota and BMW, and they're not seeing those shortages yet. But some of them have received the dreaded corporate email telling them that, hey, things are okay right now, but certain parts could come into short supply over the next few weeks. And so much of that is going to depend on not only how quickly China and Japan get their production back up, but also how the virus continues to spread and how that crisis shakes out here in the U.S. in terms of our reaction to it and just how well prepared we are to deal with the potential uncertainties and the problems that could come around. But so far, you can still go to your local parts store and get car parts. So that's good news. In terms of car sales, global car sales unsurprisingly, have been negatively affected by this virus outbreak. The worst numbers, of course, coming out of China. New car sales in China for February, because February is the last month we have full data for. New car sales in China in February were down over 80% as compared to February last year. It's practically new car sales have come to a halt over there. Okay, now why do we here in the U.S. care how they're selling cars in China? Here's why. Hundreds of thousands of cars are made in U.S. plants by U.S. and other manufacturers and are shipped overseas to China and sold. It's kind of crazy. Like cars and car parts are made all over the country and then they're shipped to other countries and then they're assembled as cars and they're all shipped back all over the place to sell the completed cars. So it looks like a spaghetti on the map of the world in terms of how all the parts and the cars themselves are just shipped around the world and we're trading parts and cars. It's just a complicated, very interconnected global industry. So yes, when car sales in China plummet, it has an impact on people here because if we're not selling cars to China that are produced here, does that mean we need to be producing that many cars? Is it cutting, workers' salaries? It's definitely cutting into the bottom line of companies like GM and BMW, and they employ U.S. workers. So what happens in other countries absolutely affects what happens to us here. You're amazed. Tesla sells cars to China, Toyota, Ford, Jeep, as I said, GM, Mercedes, they all build thousands and thousands and thousands of cars in the United States, in plants here, and then ship them over and sell them to China. More Buicks are sold in China than anywhere else in the world. Apparently, Chinese people love Buicks. Hey, more power to them. They are comfortable cars. So as those sales, not only in China, but around the world suffer, the U.S. manufacturers are going to suffer too, and the plants here are going to suffer. So we have to be aware of how interconnected our economies all are. Now, the coronavirus epidemic has not really appeared to have an impact on the U.S. car sales as of February. Actually, February car sales this year were a little bit up from February sales last year, and all the analysts had been predicting a decline in new car sales in 2020 anyway. Obviously, now they're predicting a bigger decline, but February was a pleasant surprise for everybody in the industry as numbers were a little bit up in the U.S. But again, that could change, and the situation could change rapidly depending on how the virus spread unfolds here in the U.S. And one of the things that could rapidly change is we could very quickly go from a supply problem, the problem of not being able to produce enough cars because we're not getting the parts, to now we're getting production ramped back up. We're getting the parts. We're able to produce the cars. We're able to produce the supply. But then all of a sudden demand plummets because if the virus continues to spread here and the panic that's causing people to hoard toilet paper continues to spread, then, as consumer confidence goes down, it has a huge impact on our economy. People, if they're scared about the future, they're not sure, am I going to have income? How's my job going to be? Am I going to be healthy? As we have those fears as consumers, what do? We stay home and we don't spend money. We keep our wallets tightly closed, and big ticket items like cars tend to be the things that suffer first. We're still going to go out and obviously buy toilet paper if we can find it. We're still going to buy food. We're going to buy the necessities, but we don't tend to buy luxury items, or we don't tend to buy big ticket items. So even people that need a car because their car died or it was totaled in an accident or for whatever reason, they may decide to be a little more conservative, as they typically do in times of economic downturn. And they may say, maybe I'll buy a used car, something a little bit cheaper, instead of splurging on that new car. And as a result, new car sales could plummet. So we could very rapidly swing from a supply problem to a demand problem. We've seen drastic plunges in the stock market over the last week. I've just literally not even been opening those emails from my financial planner, because I know I just got to write it out. I'm in it for the long haul, but I am obviously worried about people like my mom who are in her 70s and she's living on that money, so it's reducing her pool of money. And obviously those people are definitely going to be tightening down on their expenses. But, as the stock market continues to see a lot of volatility, it can trigger a bigger economic shutdown. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. I actually have a degree in quantitative economics, so unfortunately I understand this stuff way more than I would actually like to right now. But it all boils down to people get scared, they don't spend money, new car sales plummet. We're already seeing some slowdowns in the new car market in specific areas, most notably fleet purchases by the rental car companies. So many of the new cars sold every year are sold to rental car companies, not just to us individual consumers. And because of all the travel shutdowns, the bans, and just people staying home, they're not renting cars. So the rental car companies are like, we're not going to buy as many cars for our fleet this year because we don't know when the travel is going to resume. So that is impacting all of the manufacturers that sell lots and lots of cars. And that's everybody. That's Toyota. That's all the American manufacturers. That's Subaru. That's Hyundai. They all have big rental car sales every year. And as that goes down, obviously they're going to suffer. Now, of course, on the positive side, because, I want to always keep things positive. I don't want to be all doom and gloom today. When new car sales drop like that, they have sales. The manufacturers come up with rebates and low APRs and all these great incentives to get us off our butts and into the dealerships to buy their new cars. So, as the economy turns down, if you are in the market for a new car, you're probably going to be able to get a great deal as long as it's on a car that we actually have supplies of. The other thing that is very positive that I'm seeing is how at least the big three American manufacturers, Ford, GM, and Fiat-Chrysler, how they are handling this situation in regards to their employees personally and our society in general in terms of their social responsibility as a massive company to help reduce the spread of the virus. And we already are seeing confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, South Carolina, Kentucky, Texas, all the states where we have these major car manufacturing plants. And certain workers that, from Ford and GM have tested positive and are now under quarantine. And so the automakers are really working hard to combat the spread of the virus and to protect their own people. They have told employees that if your job and you can work from home, and they're giving them the technology and the tools to do so. They're saying work from home. They're going to virtual work environments. They're reducing the number and the size of in-person meetings. They're leveraging technologies like Zoom and GoToMeeting and being able to have virtual meetings and conference calls instead of people getting together face-to-face to reduce that spread. For the teams that obviously can't work virtually, you can't build cars virtually, at least not yet. That could be kind of cool. Once we get to be able to digitally print cars, yeah, I bet we could probably work remotely and all the robots would actually build the cars and digitally print them, and the people that worked those machines could do it virtually. That'd be cool. But we're not there yet. So in the meantime, what they're doing, especially GM, has adjusted their work schedules in their manufacturing plants as well as their customer care and contact centers. So, because those employees can't work from home in some cases. So what they're doing is they're shifting all the schedules to allow the work environments to be cleaned more frequently and disinfected so that they're reducing the chance of the virus being able to linger around on all the surfaces and in the air. So I thought that was a really creative solution, and it's likely going to be a very important one for reducing the spread of the disease. So kudos to them on that. They're also increasing the supplies of, sanitation supplies, the availability. I'm sure there's some of the ones that are hoarding all of the antibacterial soap and the antibacterial wipes and the hand sanitizer, but that's okay. They need to do that if they need their employees to be physically at their locations to work. And of course, they're implementing travel bans and restrictions so that their employees aren't flying around the world like they normally do. Instead, they're trying to have those meetings via the virtual tools, which is great. Another great thing is that they are implementing visitor protocols and restrictions. So people just can't, come into the plants. A lot of times they have these plant tours, and, as tourists, we can go in and we can see how they build the cars. And I've done that at the BMW plant about 2 hours away from me in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And that's an incredible tour. If you ever have the opportunity to do that, it's absolutely amazing to see their manufacturing processes and logistics. Now, granted, I'm a nerd about that stuff, having come out of the management consulting world, but it's really, really cool to see. But most of at least Ford and Fiat and GM have put the kibosh on that for now. And they're really, really limiting the number of outside visitors that can come into their facilities to reduce the spread of the virus. And that just makes sense. The United Auto Workers Union is also negotiating with the big three and other employers to ensure that the factory workers who are under quarantine or may become under quarantine, that they're compensated through paid sick leave so that they can stay home, they can stay quarantined without worrying about their paycheck, because that's going to be the biggest problem around the world and in the US is, people aren't going to want to stay home. Well, they're going to want to stay home, but they're going to feel like they can't stay home. They have to go to work, because if they don't go to work, they don't get paid. And they don't get paid, they don't get to pay their rent, and they don't get to eat. So that's the biggest challenge, especially in the US, for containing this disease, is the pressure to go to work so that you still get your paycheck. And I really applaud the automakers for working with the union and working very constructively with them. GM has already signed on and has agreed that all quarantined workers are going to receive full compensation until they are medically cleared, and GM's making sure they get all the medical care and attention that they need to be healthy, to be able to come back to work and to not spread the disease to other employees and, of course, to their family and friends and neighbors. Ford and Fiat-Chrysler are expected to sign on to the same agreement any day now. So the big three, at least, are taking care of their workers. I don't have data on what, Honda and Toyota and Hyundai and everybody else are doing at their plants here in the US, but I can only hope that they are following similar protocols and will have similar agreements with their employees, and most of them are non-union, but that they will still take care of their employees and make sure that when people do need to take that sick leave, that they can, and they won't have to worry about their paycheck being docked for it. So what should you do as a potential car buyer and as a car owner during this challenging time? Because the reality is, yes, this coronavirus outbreak is negatively impacting the U.S. automotive industry, and unfortunately, it will probably get worse before it gets better. So here's what you can do. If you want a new car that is produced in Japan or China, if you want a Subaru Forester, you want a Toyota 4Runner, I would recommend buying it now while there are still supplies, because we don't know how long that supply chain may be disrupted, and we literally could run out of those cars, and that could last for several months. We just don't know. It's going to depend on how this virus is managed. As I said earlier, if your car needs service and repairs, do it sooner rather than later while you can still get the parts. Don't get into any accidents. Don't crash your car. Don't crash somebody else's car, because if you do, you might not be able to get the body panels and the other parts to fix it. So everybody drive safely and don't crash into anything. That's probably a good thing to do just anytime, but especially right now. And also, don't panic. If you want to buy a car but you want to, like, I don't want to go to the dealership and test drive cars that other people have touched and be in the dealership and sitting in chairs and tables where other people have been, where I might expose myself or my loved ones to this disease. Guess what? We've been able to shop for cars online forever. And this is what I have been preaching anyway. I always tell people, under even ideal circumstances, don't ever go into the dealership to negotiate a car deal. Do all of your research online, do all your homework, do all your negotiating. If you need to go test drive a car, yeah, definitely go and test drive that car. Schedule an appointment and, make sure, tell the dealership, hey, can you please make sure the car has been wiped down really well before I test drive it? And wear some nitrile gloves. I have tons of nitrile gloves because we're always working on cars, so I'm wearing them all the time anyway. But, nobody is going to look at you funny right now if you go into a dealership or anywhere else for that matter wearing a pair of nitrile gloves to help protect yourself. Nitrile is better than latex because, one, people have latex allergies, but latex is also a little bit porous and little tiny microscopic things can get through it. Nitrile is not. That's why they've gone to those in hospitals. So get yourself some nitrile gloves. Don't hoard them. Just buy one box and you can wear those on your test drive. And then, of course, leave right after your test drive. Go home, wash your hands thoroughly. They say you have to wash your hands for 20 seconds in order to kill the germs. And it's been really funny because I've seen on Facebook everybody coming up with these memes of different songs and things that they can sing or recite that take 20 seconds to keep themselves entertained or to teach children how long you should be washing your hands for. And me, being the total nerd that I am, have realized that really any of the introductory scrolls to any of the Star Wars movies takes about 20 seconds to recite. Of course, that assumes you're as big of a nerd as I am and that you can recite all 9 of those from memory. But wash your hands for 20 seconds when you get back from the car dealership. And in general, just be smart. Right now, we need to take the precautions that are being recommended by actual experts, like the people at the CDC, infectious disease experts, the World Health Organization, not necessarily what the politicians and the media are telling us, but the actual experts. But we also can't let fear and panic dominate all of our thoughts and actions. We need to be kind. We need to be compassionate. We need to be understanding. And we need to get through this together. Because anytime we face a crisis like this, the only way we're going to get through it is if we work together. So don't let this stop you from buying a car. Don't let this stop you from getting the service work you need on your car, but just be smart about it. So quit hoarding the toilet paper and go wash your hands. Until next time, folks, I'm out of here. Drive safely.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, the Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or the Car Chick.